Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, November 9th, 2025, and this past Tuesday, we saw an election result across the country that was tremendous for the Democratic Party in more ways than one. They won a variety of key and important races on the local level, statewide level, city level, and what we saw was a near complete and total rejection of the President of the United States as they barrel into the 2026 midterm elections. The 2025 races were of the utmost importance for Democrats to win because it was the first real display as to whether or not they were going to have an actual pushback against what Donald Trump is doing in the White House, whether or not that was something that he was going to be able to, counteract with campaigning and endorsing Republicans across these states, including in some cases endorsing previous adversaries like Andrew Cuomo in the city of New York, and really going to bat for Jack Ciattarelli in the state of New Jersey in a race that many Republicans were hoping would be far more competitive. But what we saw on Tuesday was what we had predicted on the Monday before, and this video is not going to be an analysis of the results, but rather a questioning as to what the results look like in comparison to what our predictions were roughly a day in advance. Now, what we knew from the results here, from the lieutenant governor's race in Virginia, governor's race, attorney general's race, the governor's race in New Jersey, California's Proposition 50, and the New York City mayoral race, all of the races that we predicted on this channel, was that every single one of them, the victor on here, was correct. I mean, we got, our expectation was that the Democrats would run away with it, do well in all of the states, do well in all of the races, and to the degree that they were going to win by was what really we were predicting. And while there was some hesitancy, I think, from some members, even on the left, even those in the center, in saying that Mikey Sherrill was a shoo-in for the New Jersey governor's race, that Jay Jones would win the attorney general's race, the point is that what we saw on election night was that not only did Democrats do well, but they actually exceeded many of our own estimations here on this channel. And so I want to go on a state-by-state and a race-by-race basis to really unpack, one, what did we predict, and what was the final result, and how does that accuracy look like in one direction or the other. So let's go ahead and get started at the top of the ballot here with the New York City mayoral election. So in terms of predicted margin here, I predicted that Zohran Mamdani would win this race by 15 percentage points. Okay, that was a pretty comfortable margin and was one that was largely led by a lot of the data that we had seen, and given that the primary data had really underestimated what the results were in that election, I believe that there would be a slight underestimation of what Mamdani's actual support would be on election day. But in terms of actual vote share, I believe that he was never really going to cross that 51% threshold. I felt like he was going to win the mayor's race. That was never going to change between June and now. But I did believe that, at least to some point, when it came down to, actually getting over that hurdle of the majority, I thought he'd get barely there, but that Cuomo would bleed a lot of his support to Curtis Sliwa. That was the reason why I felt like the margin there. Sure, I felt that the combined vote share against Mamdani would be 49%, but I did believe that Sliwa would get a more sizable portion of the electorate than what he actually did, which we can see on the screen right now. Mamdani did get roughly what we were predicting. We were off by, 0.6% in terms of actual, vote share, but I go by margin, so we'll shift it away from that. But Cuomo receiving 42% of the vote and Sliwa receiving just 7%, I think really goes to show that many of those Republicans, even those who were, probably hardline Trump conservatives, because Donald Trump did get about 33% of the vote in the city of New York, they didn't flock to Curtis Sliwa, they instead flocked to Andrew Cuomo. And so even though there might have been, in theory, this opposition against Mamdani that comprised of 49% of the city, that's still not a majority, and elections are won by, in some cases, even narrower margins. And at this point, Mamdani still won the race, 50.4 to 41.6, which is not 15%, but it is still impressive because what you're finding is that across the city, he was supposed to lose the primary. He was never supposed to come within a range of, doing as well as he did. And the fact that not only did he win, but it wasn't that vote splitting what tanked Cuomo or Sliwa. It was that the majority of voters, by a 9-point margin, said that they want Mamdani in the city. And so in terms of actual final results here, we see that the Democrats did in fact win by roughly 8.8%. For the sake of predicted margin versus final result, we're going to go ahead and let me make sure that everything here is centered. But the point is that what you're going to find is that the result here, while underestimating, Republican support, I guess independent support. I just want to adjust all of these. I should have done this ahead of time. I tried to make this prettier than the one we used on Monday, if you want to take a look at that. But let's see here. Or I guess this one would be yes. I don't know what's happening there. Yes, plus 17. The final result here was D plus 9, which means that the independents gained about 6% support. And so that really is just, what we saw with Cuomo there. Not really that surprising. I'm going to give it this yellow background because the final result here was still a Democratic victory, but the accuracy point was that we underestimated the amount of vote share that Andrew Cuomo was going to get. But at the end of the day, the victor was correct, and the margin, while not entirely right, the vote share, damn near accurate. And so moving on to California's Proposition 50, the next one that really, captured a lot of energy, and for right reason. We only have about 80% of the vote in, but we actually expect the yes number to go up as more of the results are coming in. So we're going to have to wait and see. I can't spell today. I just realized I misspelled accuracy. I'm sure someone's already commented it down below, but hopefully we've caught them ahead of time. But California's Proposition 50 passed overwhelmingly in favor of yes. Now, this is one that I actually thought would underwrite and underrun Kamala Harris across the state. I thought that, there was going to be a lot of enthusiasm for it, but there was some initial hesitation from some Democrats across the state as we started to see, what those voting numbers looked like on Election Day as they were turning out. I felt like my prediction was going to be off, but obviously I don't make same-day changes or updates because once voting opens, I think that you should probably have had your prediction before voting has opened and not be done, as you get those early voting numbers out of, Oakland and out of Sacramento and out of Los Angeles. I don't think that's the fairest way to go about it. And so, we'd certainly underestimated Democratic support in California's Proposition 50. Right now, it looks like yes is going to pass across the state by 28% and growing. It could be even higher by the end of it, which means that in terms of inaccuracy, right, we are underestimating Democratic support in the state by roughly 11 points. Keep in mind, right, Kamala Harris won California by 20. And so for it to go overwhelmingly in favor of the Dems this time, we thought it would be, a 17-point delta. It is nearly a 30-point delta, and it probably will be, given that more results are coming in. So far, New York City mayoral election, slightly underestimated Andrew Cuomo's margin. Prop 50, pretty significantly underestimated Democratic support across the state, but also, too, blue wave across the board sometimes catches everything by surprise, including California's Prop 50 here. The Democrats ended up still doing extraordinary in that race, winning by 28 percentage points. Let's move on to Virginia's governor race. This is one that we were watching very closely, tracking very heavily. I believed that Abigail Spanberger would win by a margin here of roughly 11 points. She ended up winning by roughly 14.6. Still some votes to count, an expectation that it'll slightly uptick by the final result, but what we know is that she won by 15 points. And so it shouldn't really be that much of a surprise that the inaccuracy point out here was that we were off by roughly 4%, again, underestimating the Democratic support in the state. I thought she'd win by double digits and that, everyone else would slightly underrun her. But what we saw was just a complete and total, pushback against Winsome Sears and the Republicans across the state, that every single Democrat on the statewide ballot here outperformed Kamala Harris, every single one. And so I think that is just, speaks for itself. But Abigail Spanberger won by an extraordinarily large margin, 15 points in a state that, Biden's 2020 performance was the best performance for Democrats in Virginia in over 60 years. Even in 1964, when Lyndon B. Johnson won near every single state, Virginia was still closer than what it was in 2020. And so for Biden to have had that best performance and then Abigail Spanberger to blow it out of the water really goes to show exactly how strong her election performance was and Democrats across Virginia at large. And that brings me to the lieutenant governor's race that we knew would be slightly more competitive, but we knew the Democrats would win anyways. We saw that Ghazala Hashmi elected to the lieutenant governor's office against John Reed by roughly 11 points in the state. We predicted it would be roughly 8%, so likewise to the governor's office, our final margin here was off slightly by about 3 percentage points, underestimating Democratic support in Virginia. But the big one that I think was shocking to many was Jay Jones in the Attorney General's race. Jay Jones, who received an onslaught of attack ads and last-minute efforts from the Republicans, who after leaked text messages really did spiral the Jay Jones for Attorney General campaign against the Republican incumbent in the state of Virginia. But not only did Jay Jones win the race, which we predicted that he would, he did so by an extraordinary margin, outperforming Kamala Harris across the state and showing that in 2025, the Democrats really, really, really honed in and locked in every single race, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. I mean, Jay Jones was not meant to win this race. Under a 2024 environment, he would have lost it by 5-6 points. But in 2025, Democrats were so angry, so enthusiastic, that it really was a big reason that we saw Democrats do well, not just in the Attorney General's race, obviously the one we're talking about, but also in the House of Delegates, also in a number of other circumstances too across the country, because voters are angry and are willing by any means necessary to vote out the Republicans who are currently in office. And that's what we saw on Tuesday, which is why, in our estimation, we were saying, okay, there are a lot of voters in Virginia, and Virginia is a state, especially in these off-year elections, are highly tuned in elections of voters, right? These are people who watch the news, they engage with the Washington Post, they read who are they endorsing for Virginia Governor X, Y, and Z. And obviously not to say that that sways the election, but they certainly are reading it. They certainly are consuming things in a way that, in 2020, for instance, Mark Robinson, who, was running for lieutenant governor, a much lower profile race than obviously the presidential in North Carolina and the Senate race in North Carolina. And the problem was that although Democrats had all this opposition research, many of the things that came out against him in the governor's campaign had previously come out against him in the lieutenant governor's race. Nobody was paying attention. And so in Virginia, the downside for Jay Jones was that a lot of voters were paying attention. His polling numbers had completely fallen off after the scandal, but we knew there would be some quiet Jay Jones voters that didn't feel comfortable telling the pollsters that they were voting for a Democrat who they believed, should be disqualified from the race. There's actually exit polling data on this too. About 9% of those voters who say that Jay Jones's text messages should be disqualifying from the race voted for him. 1 in 10 people who say, I'm here because Jay Jones should be disqualified from the race for his actions, and then quietly voted for him. Because they didn't want to say, overwhelmingly, I stand by what he did. And I'm sure, right? This is something that both sides universally condemned. But in terms of who they'd rather see in office, they'd rather see a D than an R in office. And that's what happened with Jay Jones. And that probably explains why this was the race out of Virginia we were off by the most. The final race we are looking at is the New Jersey governor's race. One that I did think that, Democrats were freaking out about, and I think for a point, maybe rightfully so, but obviously with the election results, never really made sense. And while I did try to say Democrats need to call to attention to this race, it could be a sleeper, I also said it could not be, right? And my final prediction was that although the polls had said Mikey Sherrill's up 1, Emerson College loved them, but didn't get it right, said that the Democrats would be up by 1 point in New Jersey governor's race, we knew that they would be up by more, because we knew that New Jersey at its core in a 2025 year was going to vote better than what it did for Kamala Harris in 2024. And so Mikey Sherrill, in my final prediction, I said would win by 7 points. But on election day, not only did she win, she did so by a massive amount. She won across the state by 14 percentage points. That is massive. I mean, can't you put that into, comprehension, just how insane that actually is? And that means we underestimated her support in the state by roughly 7 points. I'm not proud of that one, but I do think that it was something that it caught everyone by surprise. And so what we know in terms of reflecting on this, I'm glad that I got every single victor correct in all of the important races. But the point is, unlike in 2024 when, and we talked about this constantly, we predicted the 2024 election wrong. I will stand by the fact that I said that Kamala Harris, I believed, would win the presidential election. And while we can go back and forth as to, whether or not there was actually a 50% odds, as was suggested by major forecasters, because I do think it was a toss-up race. All of those states were down to less than a point. I said that coin toss tomorrow, Trump could win all of the 7 swing states because that's just how close they are. But again, getting back to this point about 2025 underestimating Democrats this time, I do think that is the nature of these elections, where it is immensely hard to some degree to say with 100% certainty exactly how a race will go by projected vote share. But I do think that when it came down to these 2025 races, I felt far more comfortable predicting that it would go one way. Even the Jay Jones one, you can read the comments on my initial video. There were people who adamantly disagreed with me. The betting markets on the day I made my video were saying back and forth, but for a month straight had said Jason EnigMarZ was going to win. If we had done this a week in advance, I probably would have gotten far more pushback, but I probably would have stood by the idea that Jay Jones was going to win. still, right, there's always going to be disagreement and uncertainty with these things. But at the end of the day, I'm glad we got these things right. And to see that Democrats outperformed expectations really puts things into perspective. And I think that 2026 will be very fascinating for both parties if this trend line continues. And as it stands right now, I'm glad that we were accurate, especially in New York City's mayoral race in terms of actual vote share. That one I'm very pleased about. But when it comes down to everything else, I think that what we are at so far is that Democrats are not only outrunning what pundits are saying on the mainstream media, they're outrunning a lot of people's expectations, a lot of the polling data, a lot of the surveys, even the ones that are favorable to them that Republicans reject. When Mikey Sherrill saw polls of her up 6-7 points, Republicans scoffed and laughed at it and said, there's no way in hell she's up. But guess what? Not only was she up, she doubled those margins across the state. And so I think that moving forward, we have to keep that in mind. Keep in mind that there could be, to some degree, some quiet Democratic voters this time around who may not be as forthcoming with the pollsters and saying exactly who they're voting for. But there might be a sizable portion of the electorate right now that, being disaffected with Donald Trump and Republicans at large and disagreeing at large with the Democratic Party nationwide, still finds themselves filling in the ballot for the Democratic Party in a number of competitive races. And as we get the special election in December and more races later down the line, it will be very interesting to watch. But I'm glad we were right about many of these races. And this is the accuracy map of what it looks like between the final results and my projected margin in many of these races. And I'm quite pleased with these results, even if we did underestimate Democratic support in the majority of these races. At the end of the day, what we're looking at, too, is that the margins were not perfectly right, but the winner was correct. And also not to mention, too, that it seemed to have been a pretty universal blue swing across the board here, which is a bad sign for the Republican Party moving forward and something they will have to navigate and keep in mind as we go right into the 2026 midterm elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.